So, I've changed my mind about 3 times today about which ship to do. So I apologise now. It's the HMS Diamond. And it's probably going to be going up late, but this is not the current HMS Diamond. This is not even the oldest HMS Diamond either. This is the HMS Diamond, 1950. So this is the diamond of my book. This is the diamond that the Royal Navy was using at the time of the Suez Crisis. And the reason I picked her is because she's a very good lesson in the limits of conventional deterrence and gunboat diplomacy. Her career is an extremely good lesson in the realities of perception. You see, you can have all the firepower in the world. You can be the most powerful warship ever to float your boat. But if people don't think it'll actually be used, they don't bother. In modern times, there's often a saying amongst international relations specialists. The worse the President of the United States is, the easier international relations are. When you have a good man, or at least a peacefully inclined man, as President of the United States, it is probably better, on the whole, for America. Theoretically. It's not as good for the rest of the world. Because, honestly, for it to work, when you're looking at the rest of the world, you need to be able to hold your position. You need to be able to convince the bad actors you will actually act. And the trouble is, bad actors tend to view anyone who isn't able to mirror them as being weak. Now, this is not to say good people cannot do deterrence. This is not to say nice people cannot do deterrence. I'm not sure whether I'm necessarily the best example, knowing my own self as well as I do. But I've often found standing in the way, stepping into the way in problems, and just being calm, level, and constant has been known to cause people to think twice, to consider their actions. But I think often the point that's missed in deterrence, in gunboat diplomacy, and all these things, the point that's missed is that you need to be unequivocal when you're making these things. At the Tsingtao incident in 1939, the Royal Navy was unequivocal. There was no alternate options. There was nothing given as a, well, maybe we'll do this, maybe we'll do that. I would say, when it came to Mers el-Kabir, I think perhaps giving the range of options was the wrong thing to do. Limiting it to the 3. Move your fleet to the Caribbean or the Far East. Come join us and continue to fight. Or be sunk where you are. 3 options. Instead, they tried to give them a range. The more options you try and give, the more off-ramps to use the modern parlance, you try and give your opponents, the more they sometimes read into that as being weakness, as being room for negotiation, when there might actually not be any. HMS Diamond of 1950, D35, has an interesting career from that regard. She often finds herself in situations, and I'm going to be talking about one specifically, where she is being used to deliver a message, to send a message. And it isn't always listened to. And there are discussions as to whether that was because Britain was by this point not as strong as it once was. I would argue that's not the case. I'd argue up until definitely at least the Suez Crisis, actually a bit later than that. Britain might not be a superpower, but there aren't many powers who can rock her boat. And there's a difference. Just because you're not the number one doesn't mean you can be easily cast aside and ignored by other people. This is another problem you have. It's self-perception. And I'd say that's a problem Britain has had. But other countries also have it. Because you're not number one, you're nothing. That's not the reality. That's not the reality. There's often a phrase, second place is first loser. That's true, if you're running a race. But being a nation is not a sprint. It's a marathon. A never-ending marathon. And being second in a marathon which never ends is not bad. Neither is anything in the top 10, let's be honest. When you're hundreds of participants, the differences between you and the next people down, next 10 down the line, and the 10 below that, and the 10 below that, are astronomical. And I would say you have to be able to project that and understand that before you can do deterrence, and conventional deterrence especially. And it even comes up to America, because being number one and acting like number one are two different things. There's a difference between acting with arrogance and acting with force. Too often, force is considered automatically you're applying military power, you're blowing something up. No. Because if I do this, that's force. I'm stumping myself. I'm making people see me. But I can also project force like this. Really? Sometimes the most powerful tool at your disposal in shaping what others do is in shaping their perception of you. And that starts with your actions, with how you present yourself, how you carry yourself. When you're a nation, your clothes are not a t-shirt, not a shirt and tie or a suit. They're a warship. They're an embassy. They're who you choose to deliver your message. Who represents you. Force doesn't necessarily mean violence. Force can include the application of violence, but it can also include a display of strength. And sometimes that means taking a position with a vessel which is otherwise not as strong. Again, this is a confidence thing. One of the things we've noted recently in recent years with the US Navy is every problem gets the same solution, an Arleigh Burke. And the Arleigh Burke is a powerful tool. It's a very good tool. But it's also a one-size tool for the problems. And sometimes going in with a tool which is perhaps not as capable shows more confidence. You go in straight away with a Burke, you've gone in already with something which is so powerful. Oh, they have to send a Burke. They have to send their very best. You send in something else which people know is not your very best. Then, is it an insult? Is it a statement of confidence? It throws them off. It makes them question things. And more importantly, while they're looking at it, they start imagining how capable your best really is. Now, this book is, of course, a shameless book plug. I have to admit, this particular story doesn't make it into the book. Mainly because other ships did. But I thought with a recent discussion of HMS Diamond and predecessors with her name, it would be appropriate to discuss the story of Diamond, at least one of them, today. At least one of them. Honor clarisma gemma. Honor is the brightest jewel. HMS Diamond D35. Built in a period when the Royal Navy was in transition. When the Royal Navy had fought World War II, to quote a recent TV host who was discussing it, had won the Battle of Britain against German U-boats. Oh my, if it was so simple. Nowadays, they talk about and go, well, why can't we just stop missile attacks on ships? A simple answer is numbers. Simple answer is investment. Simple answer is the Royal Navy wanted 12 Type 45s and they planned the bidding for that. Instead of getting 12 Type 45s, they got 6. People then call them £1 billion destroyers because they cost the program overall costs £1 billion per unit. All sorts of things were cut as well to make them cheaper in design, including the extra power plants and all sorts of systems which would have added to their capabilities and made some of the recent additions which have been welded into their hulls not needed. But let's start off with that cost. That cost. If you consider the actual costs of the vessels and the research costs of the vessels, well, the average of the first 6 modern daring class destroyers, the Type 45s, in terms of their construction costs, is roughly 450 to 460 million a unit. After all, they're the first vessels in the class, and you need to get tooling, set up the infrastructure for yards, all those things. and then you add on the cost of research, well, you end up with it being £1 billion per unit. If we go by the Type 23 model, which is a fairly good financial model to predict by, and what they were talking about when they were initially ordering them, the next 6 would have probably come in around about 250 million per unit on average. The classic example is the Type 23s, the spread between the initial one, which cost around 200 million to build, and the last one, which came in about 45 million. So, to build. That was across a class of 16. Slightly less complicated vessels, but for their time period, I will admit, less complicated. But it's a fairly decent model to follow. The fact is then, if you build the next 6, that takes the entire project costs up to 7.5 billion, and well, you end up with 650 million pound destroyers for 12. 650 million pounds per unit. Doesn't sound as catchy as the £1 billion destroyers, does it? Now, I would love to say this was a new thing, because, you know, we're now with the Type 83s before that, even in the water, people are saying, oh, maybe we might not get as many, might not match the Type 45s in service. We really need to as bare minimum. Because if you want to be able to have ships deployed around the world, you need to have enough units to deploy them. The Daring class destroyers in 1949-1950, the Royal Navy planned 16, that's roughly 2 flotillas at a time, 4 flotillas under the war standard of 4 ships per flotilla, and the Royal Australian Navy were to get 4. The Royal Navy built 8, cancelled 8, and the Royal Australian Navy built 3. There is only one preserved, HMS Vampire, and at some point I will do a video about her. Again, these ships start off that historical event where the Royal Navy does a study, works out how many ships it's going to need, asks for those ships, orders those ships, and the government cuts them in half. Governments often reason, well, we've got enough powerful destroyers. We've got the battle class, we've got these, and that's a good argument to make. That's a fine, understandable case to make in the 1950s. Less so in the 1990s and 2000s. A lot less so. But it's understandable. The thing is, the first part of looking like you actually have conviction behind your words when you wish to deter conflict is being appropriately clothed. If you want to deter someone going in looking like this, hello, it either looks a bit nuts, and if you want to go for the whole insane deterrence, you can. There is a methodology, just look so absolutely unhinged that no one wants to fight you because goodness knows what you'll do. But that isn't really an option for countries as a rule. And even for individuals that doesn't always work, because you get people who are just going, we just don't care, we're bigger than you, we're gonna smash you. So the rest is how you present yourself. Calm, collected, unflustered. For a nation, it's easier to look calm and collected and unflustered if deployments, if movements are more normal. That's the way you project strength as a nation. if you're not doing an extra deployment, if you're not having to surge things, if something's already there. And that requires a certain number of units. The thing is about the Daring class is they are built many ways to step up into the cruiser role, into the presence mission. Having 16 of these around would give the Royal Navy a lot of presence. A lot of capability to be places, to be visible. To be able to turn up and have those dinners, do that presence mission. So when they turn up, it's a routine. It's the Royal Navy turning up once more. It's the Royal Navy passing through the Straits once more. It's nothing unusual. It's nothing unusual on their part, so don't get in the way and don't cause trouble. Don't make them do something unusual. Whereas if you're reacting, if there is trouble and you're having to surge something from someone else, so you're having to take something away from one deployment to cover another space, that looks like you've been flustered. That already looks like you're on the back foot. It's not just something turning up as it normally does, it's something something the enemy has dictated you have to respond with. Deterrence is a lot of psychology, but it's also a lot of making the extraordinary look normal. Making the unusual every day. It's a lot of swanning. Looking cool, calm and collected on the surface, whilst beneath your legs are running like anything. These ships were designed for that. Now, I have to admit, this picture is the only one which is not of HMS Diamond. Mainly because I couldn't find a picture like this of Diamond. So this is actually HMS Defender. But it's a good picture of her. And it's a good picture because it highlights the weapons fit and the layers of weapons which are carried by a Daring class destroyer. I will say though, that tonnage is a little bit small, isn't it? It was bigger when I was doing it on the PowerPoint, so let me modify that. That's better. Standard placement, 2,830 tons, officially. Unofficially, it's give or take 100 tons on that one. And full load, 3,820 tons, and again, unofficially, give or take about 150 to 200 tons on that one across the class. Length, 119 meters, that's 391 feet. Beam, 43 feet, or 30 meters. And draft, 22.6 foot, or 6.9 meters. 2 Foster Wheeler boilers that were able of doing 650 psi at 850 degrees Fahrenheit, supplied 2 Parsons steam turbines to drive 2 shafts with 54,000 shaft horsepower for a top speed of 30 knots. Officially. A range of 4,400 nautical miles at 20 knots. They very carefully do not give the range at 16 knots. Complement, approximately 300 is what we go with, but honestly, they could be run with a lot less, they could be run with more. Sensors and processing systems, well, we have Type 293Q target indication radar, Type 291 air warning radar, Type 274 navigation radar, Type 275 fire control on Director Mark 6 radar, Type 262 fire control on Director CRBF and Stag Mark 2s. The armament, 6 quick firing 4.5 inch Mark 5s in 3 upper deck Mark 6 twin mountings. Now these twin mountings are what Henderson, if he'd had his dream and had actually managed to deliver on the things he wanted to, would have been fitted onto the Tribal class destroyers. So look at those mounts. They'd have also been fitted to pretty much every sloop, and I wouldn't be surprised if they'd have been fitted to the C-class cruisers. Because if he could have got those upper deck mounts working prior to World War II, he would have been a very, very happy man. And that would almost be an interesting question to put through if, what do you think the impact of World War II would be if those had come in time for the Tribal class destroyers? Now, for them to come for the Tribals, that means they have to be available a lot earlier than they were historically. A lot earlier. We are talking... Sorry, I'm doing some maths on design times here from memory. And maths from memory on design times is always interesting because it's putting together when they're first doing the sort of the real setting it up and... Well... The Tribals are all ordered in 1936. The design was really finalized in January 1936. So you'd have had to have it come available in 1935, realistically. You would have also found that the upper deck 4.5s would have then be fitted to every single vessel after that, because those are true dual-purpose weapons. They're capable of high-angle fire. They're capable of firing up to 80 degrees in elevation and down to -5, although sometimes there's a debate as to whether or not they could do to -5. My view is they could, just it wasn't particularly liked because it caused interesting issues in machinery. And they had a range of 20,000 yards, pretty much, at... Well, they were able to cover that at 2,449 feet a second, so pretty decent. And were able to reach a maximum altitude of 41,000 feet with their firing. So, yeah, for those of you who want it in good old meters, i.e. metric, it's roughly 19 kilometers at roughly 750 meters a second, and roughly 12.5 kilometers high. So yeah, the 4.5-inch guns, they're good. They're good systems. 4 40mm 60s in Bofors in 2 Stag Mark II twin mounts. Those are the independently radar guided systems, and you will find them roughly there. And then 2 singles in Mark V twin mounts. 2 in a single Mark V twin mount, which is a non-radar guided system, but it's further back and it's a fairly decent system again. It's a case of it's a good system to have in case of issues. They also tended to carry a range of other weapons. Again, their crews, even in peacetime, were known to collect accoutrements, assistance. As you can see, they have space for their torpedo launchers here. 2 pentad, i.e. 5 or quintuple tubes for 21-inch torpedoes. Mark 9 21-inch torpedoes, pretty decent ones, and a squid anti-submarine mortar. So they are good all-round vessels. They're capable of dealing with submarines. They've got one of the best anti-submarine weapons you've got available at this time. They are capable of dealing with large surface ships. Nothing would really enjoy having 10 21-inch torpedoes being aimed at it. And there aren't many things which would enjoy the 6 4.5-inch guns with their rate of fire because, well, for the upper deck mount, as is fitted here, their rate of fire could be 16 rounds per minute. Per gun. Which means if you've got all 3 turrets pointing on you, that's 48 rounds per minute coming down range at you. in 4.5-inch, that's roughly 25 kilogram shells, 55 pounds, technically 24.9 kilograms, but it's actually roughly 50 grams of difference. So honestly, yeah, we're not going to worry about 50 grams between friends. It's 25 kilogram shells, a lot of them, coming down your range of you. That's a lot of firepower heading away. An HMS Diamond service, well, that is exceptional, really. She is commissioned in February 1952. As said, launched June 1950. Laid down March 1943. She's built by John Brown and Company on the Clydebank. Yes, the same company which built HMS Hood, which built so many critical ships for the Royal Navy. Nicest way, again, the Royal Navy couldn't have got... when they're building the Daring class, one of the interesting things to look at is the yards they picked to go to them. They're built by Fairfield, Camel Laird, Swan Hunter, J.S. White, Vickers, John Brown, Hawthorne Leslie, Yarrow, or Jarrow. They're being built by some of the best yards the Royal Navy has access to. Some of the most experienced yards. Alexander Stephen and Sons, Thornycroft. The Australian ones would be built by Cockatoo Island and Williamstown. Again, some of the best yards they have access to. These ships were being built in yards which normally were the reserves of cruisers. Often reserves of capital ships. Yes, there are some destroyer specialists in there. Let's be honest. J.S. White, they are pretty much a destroyer and sloop specialist. But the rest? Ooh. Diamond was one of the ones which were built entirely of all-welded construction. And she was built with a AC electrical system, a alternating current electrical system. Daring, Dainty, Defender, and Delight were all, of course, built with a direct current electrical system. And they were grouped into the 2nd and 5th destroyer squadrons. Appropriate, if we consider what the tribal class had become. What their units they'd been put into. She took part in the Fleet Review for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. And, well, her career starts off from there. Although, it also starts off with her taking after another of the tribal precedents in that in 1953 she managed to get bow damage bumping into HMS Swiftsure, the cruiser, during Exercise Mariner, which was held off the coast of Iceland. She'd been involved in another collision in 1964, this time with HMS Salisbury, a frigate, during a naval demonstration in the English Channel. In 1970, she was one of 2 harbour training ships, which were moored at Priddy's Head Jetty in Gosport and supporting the Marine Engineering School of HMS Sultan. She was in that role till she was replaced by HMS Londonderry. As part of this role, her steam plant was maintained and usable because of the requirements of watch-keeping familiarization purposes. The needs of maintaining the capabilities to actually keep watch and to train the crews to do so. She was scrapped in Rainham in Kent in 1981. So, I've skipped over quite a few episodes in her life because you noticed I skipped from 1953. I didn't mention the refit she took her place in 1959 at Chatham Dockyard, right to 1964. What did I skip? I skipped the Suez Crisis. I skipped Korea. And yeah, she doesn't come into service till Korea pretty much is commissioned over, but she's important for Korea because her being commissioned frees up ships to go out there. Her coming along, the idea that she's coming, allows ships to be deployed to Korea because they know there is a follow-on coming on behind her, behind them, to cover the home waters and then eventually rotate out there. But no, the really big deployment was 1956, the Suez Crisis. She is deployed as part of the task force, and she actually goes into port side before the assault goes in to show resolve. But you see, the Egyptian government doesn't believe it. They believe they're dealing with hollowed out forces. Their belief is that they're in a world where no one will do anything without the superpowers. And there is a even firmer belief that they are strong enough, that there is nothing the former colonial powers can do to them. And so when this ship comes in to show British interest, British resolve, and to try and be a last visible portention of what's to come, and therefore an encourager to negotiate, to maybe deal with things by other means. Because there was a cause. Taking back the Suez Canal, the way it was done, yeah, you can agree with the fact that the people had the right to it. And Egypt has a right to it. You can agree with all that. But you can also say the way it was done leaves a bad taste in the mouth of the colonial powers. Former colonial powers. And yeah, you can argue they shouldn't have it, but the trouble is, egos get bruised. And boy, does Anthony Eden have an ego. Now, here is the interesting thing. You could argue maybe they should have sent in something bigger, a cruiser, a battleship, an aircraft carrier into harbour. Maybe that would have shown the strength of British conviction. Trouble is, those weren't really an option. By 1956, large sectors of the Royal Navy that were are not available. Even the ones which theoretically could have been available were not worked up in time, all because of inconsistent funding and divergent priorities. A nice way for it is to say a distracted government. And so this daring class, HMS Diamond, is sent in to try and convince them. And the trouble is, without the conviction behind her, without the strength of will behind her and her deployment, it doesn't matter how capable she is. It doesn't matter that she could probably solo wipe out the entire Egyptian fleet at the time without even breaking a sweat. It doesn't matter how capable and flexible she is. It matters is their perception of the people back home. And they don't think they're going to do anything. So they ignore it. They ignore the statement of the destroyer. And the Suez Crisis happens. And please note, before someone starts saying that's victim blaming, no, it isn't. It's when it's between nations. At a certain point, both sides are responsible. Because if you're a nation you believe this is honestly going to happen, then probably ready your defences, but also maybe seek negotiation to try and stop it happening. And if the other side is showing you the conviction of their intent, then it behoves you to believe it. But if you choose not to, if you choose to ignore it, the Suez Crisis happens. Sad, but it's true. So, HMS Diamond. Really, all of the Daring class had a career and a half. They had to. They were dealing with a changing world. And whilst they'd been critically undermined on a numbers front by governments which had not understood their value, they were building it. You see, I would argue it's more difficult in many ways to procure for a medium power, a global power, than it is for a superpower or a minor power. Because you go for too high tech, you can't get enough numbers. You don't have the budget. The superpowers are willing to put it. And let's be honest, in those case of those superpowers, one of them went bankrupt, and the other one has so many lies going on its own economics. I'm not sure what the frigate is going on there. And the third one, which has achieved some sort of superpower, is of course a superpower, and is the only real superpower we have, spends such a large proportion of their budget on defence that their defence budget is pretty much the equivalent to the next 5 or 6 nations combined. That's the reality of a superpower's budget. And when you're a minor power, well, no one expects you to do anything. You have a lot of interest, but you can't do anything about them, so you're basically reduced to supporting the major powers. When you're a major power, you have a problem. The Royal Navy in the Cold War ends up turning itself at points into an anti-submarine warfare fleet. That was not perhaps the smartest idea. The idea was that would make them most useful to NATO and would allow for a concentration of forces on Central Front at minimum cost. There is a logic behind it, but it is a painful one, and it's not necessarily the most sensible because it strips you of a lot of capabilities. In a way, for a medium power, the name of the game is flexibility. And this is where a daring class really came in, and ships like HMS Diamond should have been not just kept around, but should have been enhanced and worked with. This was a vessel which was capable for anti-submarine warfare, anti-aircraft, anti-surface, anti-land. It was capable of doing everything. It was a highly visible, highly capable, striking. Let's be honest, one of the things I find really nice when I'm looking at these ships, and I look at the modern Type 45s, is actually, if you look at the superstructure, there are some similarities going on there in terms of its styling and its shaping. Yes, I know the modern one is designed around stealth ideas, and this one was designed around the pragmatics of dealing with the North Atlantic and the South Atlantic, but it's still striking. It has a look. HMS Diamond was a capable, flexible, useful tool. And for a power which found itself slipping down the ranks from being first amongst equals until, well, realistically, even during World War II, for a long time it still was, because it was actually doing stuff. others sat on the sidelines, it was actually fighting. And there is something for actually using your power and doing something with your power in terms of showing your power and maintaining your position. But slipping down the ranks to number 3, number 4 in the world, I would argue probably number 3 for most of the 1950s. Because let's be honest, who else would be in the third position in the 1950s? Would it be China? They have a large army, but they can't do much with it. It's easy to pick out who are number 1 and 2. Think about who's number 3. And the pressures of being number 3 are more. Because you have to be able to adjust yourself around what people above you are doing and what people below you are doing. You have influence, you have power, you can wield strength, but you also have to be able to wield it in as much a way of a scalpel as a sledgehammer. In many ways, it's even more important that you present confidence to the world. And in many ways, when you're transitioning from having cruisers and capital ships being your presence around the world, it's even more important you need some continuity of image going on. The big destroyers of the Daring class were a continuity of image. Yes, we can point to the later developments of missiles and go, but they'd have guns, not missiles. That's true. But there is something, even to this day, which is far more visible here when you see the guns on a ship than the missiles. It has an impact. For presence, for deterrence, those guns matter. The trouble is, for the Daring class, is it wasn't just Britain as a nation which had lost its way to an extent, it was Britain as a government. And governments, when they don't really know whether they're fish or fowl, are the most problematic of things to deal with. It's very difficult to present strength to the world, to present confidence to the world, when you don't even know what you are presenting confidence about, what you're presenting confidence for, what you are presenting confidence as. It's difficult. It takes skill, and I would say, as much as you can argue that World War II is a shining example of some really good political leadership in the UK, as is World War One, in many ways the 1950s and 60s are an even bigger letdown than 1920s and 30s in terms of political leadership that follows. And don't get me started on the 1970s. You no longer have generations of leadership. You have individuals. And everything can rise or fall with the quality of those individuals and their ability to communicate. Their ability to sell people on their ideas. And the trouble is, the ideas most people vote for and most people look at are things which are intimately connected with their own lives. And international relations can seem a very distant, very unimportant object of your life, right up until it takes a nice bite out of it. Then it suddenly becomes very important. And the trouble is, saying, oh, we really could have done with 16 Daring class destroyers in the 1950s, or 12 Daring class destroyers in the 2000s, when you're 20 years later. It's always right, good to be right in hindsight, but the thing is, you can't make those ships magically appear now. In the 1950s, they stuck ships in reserve. They built them and stuck them in reserve. We don't do that anymore. That would be considered a waste of money. Really? Why? When I buy pens, I don't buy a single pen, use it, and then buy another pen, because I'd spend my entire life, whenever I run out of ink, running down, buying a pack, or going on Amazon and buying another individual pen, and it costs more. If I buy a pack of 5, I then might use 2 at the same time, because it's always good to have a second colour going on, and then I'll have 3 more in reserve. When I get down to I've got the 5th one out, order another pack. If that makes sense with pens, why does it not make sense when you have ships to buy some to put in reserve? When you're... So, for example, when you know your ships need to go in for a long-term refit. Okay, they need to go in for refit for a year to 2 years. Oh, that's fine. I don't want that refit to be disrupted. I want it to be cost-effective. So, yeah, let's take a ship out of reserve, transfer that officially to the reserve. That ship is going into refit into technically the reserve ships. And so that we'll work up the ship from reserve, transfer the crews across, dun dun dun, into service. Woohoo! We need to do a big refit to test out whether this works on the ships. Okay, we take out the ship from reserve, and because of the power problems on Type 45s, that's actually pretty much what happened to some of them, which reduced the numbers of the class available even more. The Daring class of 1950s, as typified by HMS Diamond, are a beautiful, flexible, capable asset, undermined by not having enough of them to be properly able to use them for the present missions that Britain actually needed them for. Because the thing is, you can in many ways, as a government, skip over or avoid some of the problems of looking weak in your own indecision if you've got a consistent presence going on, if you've got a consistent image going on to build from. Because what you're doing is, when you suddenly decide you need to act in the area, you're able to adopt the mask of that existing image. You've got a mask already in place of an existing image. You're not suddenly turning up looking like you're in a panic and reacting to something. You might be in a panic over something, but what's turning up is this mask of constant presence. And that helps. That helps you projecting power. That helps you with actually dealing with situations before they become a big problem. And that's the reality of what we've potentially got coming today. There are potentially going to be real problems in the Middle East, in the Red Sea, because of the need for that presence. And the thing is, it won't stop there. It won't be only there. There'll be other places in the world. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I think I'm going to stick with the 4.5 inch question, because I could do an international relations question, all sorts of things, but no, I think the 4.5 inch question is a better place to go with. Mainly because if you're going to put down your thoughts on international relations and deterrence and conventional deterrence, I'd like to hear them as they are, without the structure of a question provided by me. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Take care.